and welcome to Marketing Now and Next, a three-part mini-series from The Drum and Think with Google. I'm Jenny Baker, The Drum's senior editor, and over this series, I'll be putting marketing and creative leaders in the spotlight to uncover what's on their minds now in 2023 and next in 2024 and beyond, as we explore and unpack practical advice and insights on how to build better marketing for the future. So hi Grainne, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Now you've been on quite a journey since joining Diageo in 1997. Wow. And now Global Director of Beer, Baileys and Smirnoff.
That's right.
And you're also a very passionate advocate for diversity and inclusivity. You're the Diageo leader of progressive marketing, representative and partner of the WFA DEI Task Force, Creative Equals, and the UN Unstereotype Alliance. Wow, quite a lot going on there. But look, what we want to talk about today, diversity and inclusivity in marketing. So in 2023, right now, what does diversity mean in 2023? If we think of where we've come from and where we are now.
I mean, look, I think it's been a long journey to this point, and the journey is by no means over. And I think they're the two things we have to reflect on. Like my journey with this progressive marketing agenda started about 5 or 6 years ago when the Unstereotype Alliance here at Cannes decided to form as an alliance to tackle all of those harmful stereotypes in advertising. And that came about because a Gina Davis report at the time had said that despite all of the efforts of the industry, nothing had changed in the last decade.
Wow.
So I'm going, now that's nearly 20 years ago, right? And what exactly has changed and where exactly are we right now? And look, the reality is I think we've seen a huge effort, an alliance and gathering of momentum by the industry around this topic. And yes, right, and we all think we're doing a great job, right? Recent Kantar study says most marketeers think they are doing a superb job on representing diversity and inclusivity in all its forms in advertising. And yet, 90% of consumers still feel they're not represented. Wow. So there is a gap between what we think we're doing, what we're giving ourselves accolades for as an industry, and actually the reality of what's showing up in the work. So what that says to me is that it is a long journey. It takes like persistent, sustained effort, and our job is by no means done. So I think that's where we're at now. We should feel proud about the kind of, I think the collective intent from the industry around this, but we have to get clear that it's about collective action. And that, I think, is where we're poised right now.
And that's the opportunity. And I'd love to just, talk a bit about Diageo's journey, because you've led a real sort of transformation here. So I wonder, can you tell me a bit about your diversity framework and progressive gender portrayal program, just to give us a sense of, what impact these initiatives are having?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I'd start with Diageo itself, right? So Diageo, huge global business operating around many geographies, different cultures, different traditions, different employee sets. So, diversity is kind of at the core of what we're about. And our corporate purpose is about celebrating life every day, everywhere. Yeah. Right? So at its core, that's about bringing everybody together around the table. And in terms of sort of within Diageo, we have very ambitious and, have had for a number of years targets in terms of female representation at board and executive leadership level, ethnicity representation. I'm proud to say that 60% of our board are female. I think about a third of them are ethnically diverse. Our executive team about half. So, and we've a whole host of like market-leading policies and practices, everything from fertility to menopause to 6 months paid parental leave, regardless of how you become a parent. So I think that's kind of important context to set for the journey, because it meant that this is something that's fundamental to our purpose as a company, fundamental to our consumer base across the world, and referenced and recognised in all our policies. In terms of marketing, then, we set out this journey, as I said, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and we started with a long, hard look at ourselves. And I think that's the first place you have to start when you're seeking to create change. And we did an audit of all of our work across the world, and we wanted to see how were we doing, where did we stand, etc. And what we learned was, look, different things are important in different cultures. There are different concerns in different cultures, and it's important to be really empathetic to that and to understand that not everybody is starting, from the same place. And we used that learning to create what we call the progressive marketing framework. It started initially with gender, but now encompasses all aspects of diversity across ethnicity, disability, etc. And there are 4 elements of that. The first of which is about representation, which is pretty straightforward, thinking about who's in the ad. And I remember one of the first training modules we ran, we were looking at a piece of work that we had set in a bar, very traditional kind of alcohol context.
Of course.
And everyone was saying, oh no, that's really representative, it's fantastic, look at there's women. And I was like, yeah, but count the women. There are 4 women in the ad, and there were maybe 30 men in that bar. But because there was women, people were going, oh, we're representative. So we were actually saying, no, you have to really think about this. Like, you have to really challenge your own bias, because again, there's studies that show that people perceive a room to be 50-50 with only, I think, about 30% females in it. So people over-qualify the level of gender representation. I'm sure that's across other aspects as well. So representation, really important. People need to see themselves in the work that we create. The second of which is they need to see themselves in a way where they're not just there as tokenism in terms of representation. They need to have really authentic, truthful, characterful stories. Yeah. And we need to make sure that we're telling stories of them as rounded people, rounded cast in their own right. The next thing is obviously they need to have agency. And again, very simple things that we take for granted in some of our sort of advertising approaches. Like, for example, if you start looking at ads now on TV, you'll be surprised how many times somebody passes a woman a drink rather than a woman reach for a drink herself. Well, we obviously reach for drinks ourselves.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting thing. And then the last one, which is perspective. And that's because we're thinking about where are we pointing the camera and who are we imagining is behind the camera and who are we imagining the viewer is. And so many of the times as advertisers, we assume that the viewer is a carbon copy of ourselves, and that's not the case. And we therefore point the camera in a way that we expect them to see it as us. So perspective is a very subtle, nuanced, challenging thing to get right, but it's one that we found has unlocked other areas for us as well.
Wow, that's amazing. So the framework, okay, so how do you then embed that across, well, internally? You said, you're a massive global business, but also if you like your agency partners, and how do you embed that across?
We set out, a mandate that said we want to have our 1,200 marketeers and all of our agencies and creative partners trained in this by the end of the year. We asked people to use the framework in the assessment of all of the work, in assessment of scripts, and not to use it as a tick box exercise, but to use it, I think, properly as a way of prompting discussion and making decisions and choices. And look, there are always going to be trade-offs because you don't want cookie cutter creative either. You want it to be actually really brilliant creative. So that's how we've done it. In terms of more broadly, how we sort of drive the progressive marketing agenda is we have a central team, which I sponsor, and then a group of amazing leaders across the marketing community in Diageo drive this agenda in partnership with me across media, across our supply chain, across procurement, across internal culture, our relationships with our employee resource groups, or ERGs. Obviously, externally in the industry, there's a lot of collective action, and no one person can do it all. So we, all pair up with different task forces, and actually in that collectivity is incredible power. So that sits at a sort of a sponsorship level. But right in every market we operate, we have a progressive marketing champion whose job it is to, for example, if you're in, Colombia, to represent this agenda on, the advertising forums, in conversations, but also in the market itself in terms of making sure that the marketing and the progressive marketing agenda is, flourishing and kept alive and championed. And even more importantly, because it's so hard to sometimes see examples of fantastic work. These people are also the people who bring back to us all of the brilliant work that's happening around the world. So that's a beautiful moment as well, where we get to share that with the entire, 1,400 marketeers around the world.
I can imagine that'd be great. So, okay, you mentioned brilliant work, creative. How do you then make sure that ethos comes across in the creative work that you're putting out into the world? How does it play a part in making the right creative choices, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, first of all, it really helps in starting the conversation in the right place and helping to sort of work the work in partnership with our agencies. And, you know, this has been a big mandate, I think, from Diageo in terms of really creating a step change. It doesn't just happen with this framework. We have other things we do that I think really help in terms of getting the creative to new heights. Yeah. One of which is, again, very shortly after we created the framework, we recognised that who's behind the camera, you know, really matters. Yeah. You know, really matters. So we mandated that from there on in, on our triple bid process, there had to be, at that time, one female director. We've now expanded that to one diverse candidate for each of our triple bids. And as a result now, 47% of our global giant work has been directed by a woman. Beautiful piece of work I'll highlight from Cameroon, which is Her Home Advantage, it's called. It's a story of the Cameroonian Female Football League, which Guinness is a partner of. And at the time, we wanted to work with this incredible Cameroonian female director. And we could see that she was going to bring something very special to the work. But she hadn't done anything of this scale before. And we wanted to make sure that she was going to be successful and that this was going to be a brilliant production and that she was going to get it right. So we partnered her with some more experienced Nigerian directors. And with that, actually, this wonderful collective came where she was in the driving seat, but she was also fully supported to make like what has been a spectacular piece of work. The other thing that's interesting in that, of course, is that affects the entire supply chain because, you know, she brought female art directors, female production crew, female editors, and now all of a sudden we had an entirely diverse collective behind the work. So that's where, and that made the work, like, honestly stunning creative. Right. So to me, that's when the magic happens.
That's great example to share. Definitely sort of leading the way. So that's great. So it's really great to hear what Diageo is doing, what you said as a broader collective. But I guess if we think like now to the industry overall, you know, what advice can we offer them? What challenges do we still need to overcome, and what considerations should be factored in?
I think the thing for the industry to really remember is, like, we can be quite impatient as an industry, right? This is not something that's going to happen overnight, right? So I think that's the first thing is, and, you know, every year we're at Cannes and there's another hot topic. And this can't become just another hot topic, right? So I think patience is one of the things I'm going to say is, I think, so important. Collective effort. We couldn't have done any of the things we did in Diageo without support from the Unstereotype Alliance, which kicked off this for us, without support from organisations like Creative Equals, which helped us really understand how we were going to change, you know, our supply chain in terms of female and diverse representation at leadership level within the industry. So I think that sort of collective effort as an industry. So patience, collective effort, a sense of ambition. You know, and I think us setting really bold targets and going, we have to get to the point where 90% of consumers are saying that they feel represented in the work that we're making in an industry, right?
Yeah,
that has to be the shift we have to make rather than the other way around.
Yeah, and it is a journey, as you said, you know, it's not going to happen overnight. No. So then how does all of this affect the role of the CMO, I guess, moving forward? Like, what's changed for marketing leaders? What sort of considerations do they have to think about? I
mean, I think this is part of a sort of broader change that's happening in terms of how we think about marketing. I have always thought of the best marketeers as being like the general manager of their brand. And they're thinking as much about the performance, they're thinking about the creative, they're thinking about what it means to consumers. And I think they're fundamentally tasked with bringing the voice of the consumer into the boardroom, that the consumer's voice is heard, that it's represented, and that we understand not just where the sentiment is now, but where the consumer is going, because that's the lead for any business, to be able to understand and follow its consumers. Yeah. So I think that's where I sort of see the change happening. But I think it's exciting, right? Because it's giving a much more fundamental role for marketeers in every boardroom.
Yeah,
it's great.
Elevating the role of the CMO, for sure. So you're obviously part of lots of initiatives. You've done some great work at Diageo. In terms of what comes next, are there any particular initiatives that you're working on? Or
Another pillar which is increasing, I think, in importance, which is thinking about the context as much as the creative. So the media context, we call that media activism.
Right.
So, for example, in that space, a campaign I'll draw on is the Guinness Rugby one with Never Settle, where we discovered that, shockingly, only 4% of sports coverage was dedicated to the women's rugby game. So we said, we have to change that, right?
Yeah.
We're Guinness and we've been a partner of rugby and it's so much a part of our ethos.
Yeah.
We need to tackle that. So we set out a plan to sort of change that. We're still on that journey. But again, activating for contextual change and to have more diverse publishers, more diverse media owners, backed, supported, invested in. And what's interesting is, obviously, that sometimes creates a bit of tension with reach, right? Because you've got that sort of question, are you, how are we doing that? So we're backing that, media agenda in a big way as well. And then the final thing that we've been pushing into in the last 12 months, which I think is very exciting, is the whole area of disability. And Jeremy, my colleague, was talking about a panel on all the work we've done across our brand homes. So, for example, Johnny Walker Princes Street and across Destination Scotland, and how we've worked with disability organisations to make sure that they are incredibly inclusive, welcoming, accessible spaces. So much more to do, I would say. And 12, 18 months ago, we hadn't even thought of some of those initiatives. So I am fully sure that in 6 months' time, we'll be going, oh my goodness, and we have to do this, and we must do this. So I don't think it's an agenda that's fixed. I think it's an agenda that's only growing.
And it'll evolve, right,
Exactly.
with the consumers. So look, I think you will have inspired a lot of marketers there with your journey, what you've been on. And if you could then share maybe some actionable advice or something practical that people watching might be able to take back to their business to really ensure that diversity, inclusivity is at the heart of their marketing teams, what would that be?
I think there's a few things. I think first of all, start from a place of authenticity and empathy.
Yeah.
So understand where you are yourself, where your corporation is, where your brands are, and the role that you and your corporation and your brands have played already. So hold up the mirror, take a look at where you are, take a look at where you've been, and think about the jobs therefore that you need to do and the start place that you're coming from. The second thing I'd say is this isn't easy. Okay, so it takes a strategic, thoughtful approach with input from experts. Okay, we are not the experts in DEI, right? Even after 5 or 6 years of this journey. So I work with people who are experts, who tell me where I'm getting it wrong, tell us where we're getting it wrong, tell us where we're getting it right, what we need to do more of. So I would say open your contact book to hear from expertise, right? And then systemize the change. You can't do it with just a bold, creative piece of content. You have to think about your supply chain, you have to think about your training, you have to think about your culture, you have to think about your own teams. How diverse are the teams that you're running? Are you backing diverse candidates for the next role that comes up in your own team? Are you taking a risk on some people? So think about that, systemizing the change. And I think those 3 things help also make sure that when you are talking about D&I, that you know where you are and that you're coming from a place of deep authenticity and a bit of humility, I think, as to where we are as an industry.
Yeah, no, that's really great advice. And I guess then, as you said, it is a bit of a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. But one thing that marketers could do right now, what would you say?
I would say take a long, hard look into your own brands, the history of your own brands, understand how you have used for example, gender stereotypes throughout the course of your advertising history, and therefore, where are you starting from? And I think that's a good place for every marketeer to start. And where I always start is with myself, go with the data, what's in front of you, what can you learn from that, and where do you need to go from there?
Well, thank you so much, Grainne. That's been an inspiring conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for watching, and you can catch the other episodes in this series on data and creativity on the Think with Google YouTube page and the Drum TV.